Welcome to EV Hub Live. EV Hub Live is a live video podcast for public policy professionals working to advance transportation electrification. EV Hub Live is recorded live, so to tune in and ask questions or check the schedule, please visit atlasevhub.com/live. This episode brings together Atlas founder Nick Nigro, Peg Hanna of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, Rachel Sakata of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and Jeremy Hunt of NESCAUM. The conversation will focus on key developments related to zero emissions, medium and heavy duty vehicles, including the ACT, MHD ZEV initiative, and the MHD ZEV action plan, and the Inflation Reduction Act. This episode is produced by Peter Benzoni and Tom Taylor of Atlas Public Policy.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. Welcome to EV Hub Live. Great to be back again. My name is Nick Nigro. I'm your host. This is our 20th episode of EV Hub Live, so a little bit of a milestone for us here at the show. And it's kind of a throwback episode for us because our first episode we did over a year ago was on trucks, and here we are again. So I got a great group here to talk to us about some really exciting developments in the truck space. But for anyone who's working in EVs, know there was a big development in the passenger vehicle space last week. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. So we're going to jump right into it and talk about Advanced Clean Cars 2. And that happened in California last week. Jeremy from NESCAUM, can you give us a quick rundown on your thoughts about what happened in the California Air Resources Board last week and what it means for EVs going forward?
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for having me here today. Really excited to be on with you all. So last week, the California Air Resources Board unanimously adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations, or ACC2. And these regulations require 100% of new car and light-duty truck sales be zero-emission vehicles by the model year 2035, while also setting stronger emission standards for internal combustion engine vehicles until then. The regulations have also established minimum battery warranty and durability requirements that are going to go a long way to ensuring the long-lasting benefits of these vehicles and lead to the development of a more robust used ZEV market, which is really critical for achieving equitable access to clean mobility solutions and obtaining emissions reductions in low-income and frontline communities. And really, this is a historic moment. This is going to significantly reduce emissions of greenhouse gas emissions and criteria air pollutants from the transportation sector in California and the states that adopt these regulations under Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. We call them Section 177 states. And together with California, the 177 states represent roughly 40% of the new light-duty vehicle market in the U.S. And this market power is going to help drive down vehicle costs, making electric vehicles more affordable and drive the national ZEV market forward. And historically, we've seen that strong state standards developed by California have led to more stringent federal standards. So ACC2, along with vehicle purchase incentives and infrastructure deployment investments, help establish market certainty for automakers, and moving forward, we should see a more diverse and affordable selection of electric vehicles across various body types with increasing ranges as automakers ramp up EV production to meet these increasing ZEV sales requirements established by ACC2.
Man, it's just like, it's crazy to think that we're almost seeing the end game for the combustion engine in passenger vehicles now. At least it's on the horizon. It's such a big development. Rachel, this is your neighbor to the south. You're up in Oregon. Do you feel the heat? Do you feel the competition? Do you guys want to join that party right away? What are your thoughts up in Oregon?
Oh, yes, we are a party state. No, we are definitely joining in. We're actually beginning the process of rulemaking to propose and bring the advanced clean cars to rules before our commission for their consideration by the end of this year. So, if adopted, then we'll be in sync with California's rules, and we're, really excited about the potential possibility of, going towards an all-electric future for the light-duty fleet, and it'll also help Oregon, achieve its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So, we recognize the significance in California, and we are, jumping in. I'll feed in.
Wow. Yeah. Huge developments, and probably more to come as more states look at the rule and see what they're going to do with it. Rachel, let's stick with you because we're supposed to be talking about trucks today, but I couldn't avoid, talking about cars for a little bit because that was such a big deal. But let's talk about medium heavy duty vehicles with you now. Can you give us an understanding right now from your perspective about how electrifying these kind of vehicles is different from electrifying the passenger space, including ways in which the pollution impacts differ?
Sure. So I think, we recognize that, medium and heavy duty trucks and buses, while they only comprise about 5% of the total number of on-road vehicles in the US today, really their annual mileage per vehicle is significantly greater than those of passenger cars. And they really have a big impact on air quality and climate change. And another thing too is that, low income communities and communities of color that are often located near trucking corridors, ports, fleet garages, warehouses, and other truck distribution hubs are really hit hardest by this pollution and bear a disproportionate share of the associated health and economic consequences. So really, while this transition to zero emission vehicles for the medium and heavy duty sector may take a little more time than for like the light duty vehicles, just
Hmm.
based on sort of the goals that have been set forward. We recognize that for some of the vehicles, such as for the heavy duty trucks, they're just on a longer path to commercialization and will really just kind of benefit from further advances in the ZEV technology and really just the further development of charging and fueling infrastructure networks. And also just because the turnover of the medium and heavy duty fleet takes a little bit longer since fleet owners tend to hold on to these vehicles for longer periods of time than for light duty vehicles. So, there are a number of other things. Also you have to look at the charging times. Many of the medium and heavy duty fleets have longer downtimes, and so really they are going to require larger batteries, and you're going to require more DC fast charging and other significant other upfront investment. And so, upgrades to electrical panels and power lines, at the facility may be needed, as well as upgrades to other infrastructure. It's just going to take a little bit more time than, for example, folks just being able to plug in to, say, their dryer outlet to charge at home or
Yeah.
find other public charging. So, there's just a couple other things that, I think we can still do it. It's just going to take a little bit longer than, say, for the light duty fleet.
Let's jump back to the East Coast and Peg, bring you into this conversation from New Jersey. Give us a sense on how New Jersey is looking at the barriers here for medium and heavy duty.
So I think the first barrier that always comes to mind for me, as well as for the potentially regulated community, is the affordability barrier and the incremental cost between a internal combustion engine and an electric vehicle. So we have a couple different solutions in place or moving forward to address the affordability barrier. The first is we've extended our sales tax exemption to medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. Previously, it had just applied to light duty. So that's a big win at 6.6% sales tax. Like many other states, Oregon and California and the others in the Northeast, we also have a lot of financial incentives that have been rolled out to cover that incremental cost. We've used our Volkswagen funding exclusively for medium and heavy duty electrification in EJ communities. We rejoined RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a couple years ago under Governor Murphy, and we have used DEP's share of those proceeds exclusively for medium and heavy duty electrification as well. I think the latest tally was that we've awarded grants for almost 500 various medium and heavy duty vehicles. I think a lot of garbage trucks, school buses, and delivery type trucks. The other piece, which may be a little bit unique to New Jersey, is that our Board of Public Utilities is going to be requiring that all 4 of our state utilities play a role in offering grants for make ready for medium and heavy duty. Right now, that requirement is in place only for light duty. So we expect our Board of Public Utilities to be rolling that out later this year. So all utilities will be required to develop grant programs for make ready. And that's important, not just from a financial perspective, but it's also pulling the utilities in as part of the team and encouraging them to try to project or understand where there's weak points in the grid and where we think they're going to need upgrades. So affordability is really a really important barrier to address. The other barrier that we have addressed, and we're really proud of this, but it actually started out not so well, is we were able to streamline the local permitting process. So maybe 2 years ago, a vendor came to us and was actually spreading headlines that said New Jersey is the slowest permitting timeline in the entire country for EV charging stations. So our legislature got wind of that and passed a law which resulted in a model ordinance. And to simplify it, it essentially said that every single municipality in the state must treat charging stations the same way when we're talking about permitting them. So now we have streamlined and consistent standards for every municipality throughout New Jersey. So that's really important too. We often forget about like the local permitting zoning piece. So bringing that to the forefront and being able to address that, I think paves the way for market development in medium heavy duty sector as well.
So what's fascinating about that is that you've listed off some really important policies, clearly the roadmap of getting us to where we need to go. Jeremy, your organization, NESCAUM, brought together 19 jurisdictions in the US and Canada to work on an actual plan, an action plan, kind of similar to what I'm guessing you all did with the light duty vehicle action plan. But this medium heavy duty one just came out in July, so just a little over a month ago. Can you talk about the plan? What was the purpose of it and how does it enable emission reductions for medium heavy duty vehicles? Is it the kind of things in the plan similar to what Peg and Rachel are talking about? Give us a quick overview of that.
Sure. And I think it's probably helpful just, to start with the impetus for the medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan. So as most folks know, the transportation sector is the largest source of GHGs or greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And as Rachel said, these vehicles have a disproportionate impact on public health. They're major contributors to emissions of NOx and fine particulate matter. And we're already seeing right before our own eyes the impacts every day of climate change and air pollution with the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events and unhealthy air days. And with freight volumes and vehicle miles traveled predicted to increase well into the future, we really can't afford to delay the transition to zero emission trucks and buses any longer. So the widespread and rapid electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles is needed to avoid the worst effects of climate change and improve air quality and public health outcomes, especially in frontline and overburdened communities, often located near freight hubs, bus depots, and trucking corridors. So turning to the medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan, as you mentioned, it builds off the success of a similar multi-state initiative for light duty zero emission vehicles. And the medium and heavy duty initiative began in July 2020 with the participating jurisdictions signing on to a memorandum of understanding that commits to 100% medium and heavy duty ZEV sales no later than 2050. And it also established an interim goal of 30% ZEV sales by 2030. And to help translate this commitment into action, the participating jurisdictions through NESCAUM's multi-state ZEV task force and with input from various key stakeholder groups developed the medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan. And this plan contains more than 65 recommendations for state policymakers to support the rapid, equitable, and widespread electrification of trucks, vans, and buses. And Peg and Rachel mentioned a few of the key areas, but Other recommendation areas in the action plan include sales and fleet purchase requirements, like California's Advanced Clean Trucks regulation,
Yeah, we're going to get into that one in a bit.
vehicle
Yeah.
incentive
Mhm.
and infrastructure purchase incentives, electric utility and utility regulator actions, as both panelists describe the importance of readying the grid for these vehicles. We also include recommendations on innovative financing mechanisms, outreach and education, as well as economic equity and workforce development recommendations. So altogether, the participating jurisdictions can implement the policies and programs that best address their unique needs and opportunities for electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicles within their jurisdiction.
I think like what I'm hearing from the plan, it's just a reminder, in the passenger vehicle space, this was needed too. The ZEV program, what we were just talking about with the advanced clean cars too, and the advanced clean trucks rule, these are great foundational policies, but you can't just stop there. There is so many other facets of electrification. And, Rachel, you mentioned earlier the importance of addressing the pollution problem, especially in disadvantaged communities, because they're disproportionately affected by this. So tell us about how environmental justice communities and are going to benefit from the implementation of the plan, and how equity was a focus of the work that you all did.
Sure. Yeah. I think, I want to definitely give a shout out to NESCAUM and, and the other states, because in the development of this plan, there really was a concerted effort to seek collaboration, from national and local equity and environmental justice organizations and community groups to really get input, to ensure, how can we address pollution that can affect these communities. And so some of the things that the plan covers is, for example, accelerating the deployment of zero emission vehicles, to benefit communities that have been burdened by higher levels of air pollution. And so this can be achieved by designing incentive programs that prioritize the electrification of fleets operating in communities that are impacted by diesel emissions, as well as offering increased incentives that might cover a larger portion of the cost differential to fleets that may be located or operate in many of these overburdened communities, such as near ports or near warehouses and schools and other places where there might be, say, transit bus depots. And another thing too is like, providing technical assistance to help fleets that are, domiciled or operate in these communities. So, these are a few things. Another thing too is looking at emphasizing the charging and fueling infrastructure investment deployment to, directly benefit these overburdened and underserved communities. So really, by doing this electrification for trucks and buses really kind of helps provide an opportunity to address, sort of equity, environmental justice issues, and really, achieve some of the large scale reductions in diesel emissions that are really needed to protect public health and, help stabilize the climate.
So one of the things you mentioned that like sparked a question for me, and this could either go to you, Jeremy, or Peg, is just, I totally makes sense to have a target to get at the vehicles that are operating in these communities. Clearly, a lot of them, especially in the case of ports, are just they're vehicles that are just always in that area. But there's also a lot of pass-through vehicles that go through these neighborhoods that aren't necessarily fleets that are based in those neighborhoods and communities. So how do you make sure that you're targeting them as well? And that's a question out to anyone. Jeremy, why don't we start with you? Or Rachel, go ahead.
Well, I think part of it too is just, as I mentioned, what we're looking at is, how we can target some of the funding to these communities, by prioritizing them first, making
Mhm.
sure that we're able to sort of address, for example, transportation modes,
Mhm.
for like folks that may not have any other alternatives to
Mhm.
transport, they have to use buses. So making sure that we can deploy, for example, electric buses along those lines first,
There you go.
ensuring
Yeah.
that there's the financial incentive, things like that. So
Mhm.
that's something that I know we here in Oregon are sort of looking at. And, we have $15 million for a pilot charging program. And so we're looking at, maybe can we prioritize certain communities that might experience more pollution to put chargers in to serve, for
Mhm.
example, places that might be served by a lot of truck traffic. So these are all things that I know we here in Oregon are really focused on and looking at.
So, Peg, you're over in New Jersey. You mentioned some of the great things you've already done in the MDHG space. Utilities are going to have to get involved more. You've got rebate programs or vehicle incentive programs in place, building codes, or permitting and that sort of thing. What is New Jersey hoping to get out of this plan? What are some of the things you want to be doing that you haven't done yet?
So I think I'm going to answer it slightly differently. I think some of the things that were top of mind for us as we worked with NESCAUM and the other states to develop this plan is making sure that there was regional coordination and taking advantage of that regional coordination.
Mhm.
And I will echo Rachel's shout out to NESCAUM, but also shout out to CARB and their leadership with all things transportation. We all know, the overused phrase that there's strength in numbers. New Jersey knows what it doesn't know. And I'm the first to say, I don't know how to do something. So being able to share lessons learned and growing pains amongst all of the states and NESCAUM is really important for us. And that was a priority for us. I think the ability to collaborate with the OEMs and the other stakeholders that are going to be working with us on all of this is equally important. So that's sort of regional and stakeholder coordination, but also New Jersey specifically, one of our priorities has been interagency coordination, and that's been a challenge as well. So, historically, it's been the DEPs of the world that have worked on electrification and greenhouse gas reduction. But with all of this new money coming in, we are quickly learning that it's not just about reducing emissions, but it's also leveraging the ability to use this money to do workforce development, to localize the supply chain, to do job training for residents of overburdened communities, things like that. So setting up a forum in New Jersey, it's called the Partnership to Plug In, where we can force those or provide an avenue for those interagency discussions between the DEPs of the world, the PUCs, Economic Development Authority, Department of Transportation, was a priority for us as well. And then I guess what I'd say finally is making sure we are not doing things in a silo and not being penny wise and pound foolish. So we've spent a lot of money on light duty charging, and we need to start thinking about in the future whether some of those light duty charging locations can be dual purpose to serve the needs of the medium and heavy duty sector. So we know that in New Jersey, we're estimating maybe 10 to 20% of medium and heavy duty fleets will need public charging. So thinking about the locations of the light duty chargers and setting them up in a way so that a medium or heavy duty truck can pull through and use that charger as well. Is really important to us, because even though all this federal funding seems like a lot, it's not enough. So we need to make sure that we're being strategic about how we're using the funding.
Yeah, for sure. The federal funding, it's according to our data show, it's the most we've ever done in terms of a single investment in EV charging, but it's also a fraction of what's needed in this decade, especially if we're talking about advanced clean cars too and advanced clean trucks. Which Jeremy, you mentioned a moment ago, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, and eventually advanced clean fleets as well, the other rule in place for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So Peg and Rachel, both of your states are in on advanced clean trucks. This is another rule that's out of California that other states can adopt. Let's talk about that a little bit more and get a sense on what it means for your states and how it's going to help implement the plan, the goals of the plan. Peg, why don't we stick with you, and then we'll go to Rachel.
Okay. So at a high level, the rule affects manufacturers that sell more than 500 medium and heavy duty trucks, except that transit buses aren't included in that count. because we based our rule on California's, and California excluded transit buses because they were regulated under a separate rule. So essentially, the manufacturers are required to sell zero emission trucks as an increasing percentage of their annual sales, starting in 2025 for California and then going through 2035. And it's sort of a credit and deficit type approach, or at least that's how I like to explain it. So the manufacturers generate credits by selling zero emission or near zero emission trucks in New Jersey, or by buying those credits from another manufacturer. And then determining compliance is determined by looking at the number of credits that they must generate. No, I'm sorry, looking at the number of credits that they're generating and retiring compared to the total number of trucks that that particular manufacturer is selling in New Jersey for a particular model year. So as an example, in the starting line in 2025, a manufacturer has to ensure that 7% of their class 2B to 3 truck sales in New Jersey are zero or near zero. And that ramps up to 50% by 2035. And then there's another part of the rule that's a one-time fleet reporting that will enable DEP to get information about where these entities are operating out of, where their home base is. And that information will then be used to inform potential future regulations, such as the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. So in New Jersey, for those of you listeners that are in New Jersey and that are regulated, you are required to submit your reports to us by first quarter 2023, reflecting your fleet operations for 2022. So that's the rule in a nutshell. For New Jersey, similar to what Rachel said earlier, we only have about 500,000 medium and heavy duty trucks in New Jersey. And that's 7% of our total inventory, but it's 25% of our total transportation emissions. So we're getting a lot more emissions per vehicle from a truck than we are from a car. And like Rachel said, also, it's important from an equity perspective because where those trucks are traveling. So we adopted that rule to support not only the commitments in the NESCAUM medium and heavy duties of action plan, but also to support our state-specific commitment that we get to our climate mitigation goals for 2050.
Rachel, what's ACT mean for you all?
No, it's significant. I just want to make a quick clarification too. With the ACT rule, it has increasing sales requirements for manufacturers, starting with 2025 up through 2040, and it definitely has different percentages depending on the class type of vehicle. So, Peg mentioned the class 2B3, there's sort of a recognition too that, as I mentioned earlier, for example, the class 7-8 tractor trailer trucks, their requirement is 40% by 2040, just because of a recognition that the technology is just going to take a little bit longer, but there is still the push on them to make sure that they do produce and deliver and provide for sale, these big tractor trailer trucks, because at least for us here in Oregon, we're seeing them going up and down our I-5 corridor, and just sort of we want to reduce the emissions from these trucks overall, because for us specifically, it's one of the critical ways to reduce new truck tailpipe emissions, and it really helps Oregon achieve its greenhouse gas reduction targets. Our legislature set goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions to below 70% of 1999 levels by 2050. We can't do this without this rule. And we also adopted the fleet reporting requirements, and so fleets did have to report to us by June of this year. So we're starting to collate all the data, and we'll actually hopefully have some of the information by the end of this year that we'll be able to kind of make available on a level of some sort to really kind of help us identify where are the trucks coming, where are they sort of domiciled, what sectors do we want to start targeting for incentives for infrastructure development, so we can start getting at how can we focus on those overburdened communities here in Oregon. So it's really an exciting kind of regulation for us as we kind of start to make this transition to cleaner medium and heavy duty vehicles.
So one of the things I've heard from manufacturers about ACT is like, you're asking us to put these vehicles up for sale, but nobody's required necessarily to buy them, which that's one of the gripes that the industry had about the passenger vehicle side of things too. Obviously that's changed a lot in the last couple of years as demand for EVs have skyrocketed, at least in the passenger space. So Advanced Clean Fleets rule, and tell us, Jeremy, a little bit about what that means and how it's going to complement the truck rule.
Sure. So where Advanced Clean Trucks establishes zero emission sales requirements, Advanced Clean Fleets is a fleet purchase requirement, and fleets would be required, well suited for electrification fleets would be required to purchase and transition their fleets to medium and heavy duty ZEVs. So the three impacted types of fleets include high priority and federal fleets, drayage trucks, and then state and government fleets. And then there's a fourth component to the Advanced Clean Fleets rule that establishes a 100% ZEV sales requirement for all medium and heavy duty manufacturers beginning in the 2040 model year. Looking more specifically at some of these components, the regulated high priority fleets are those operating or controlling 50 plus vehicles or exceeding $50 million in total gross revenue. And then looking at the drayage truck requirement, beginning in the or after model year 2024, only zero emission trucks will be able to be added to the California drayage truck registry. And by 2035, all drayage trucks must be zero emission vehicles. The 100% ZEV sales mandate by 2040 applies to all Class 2B38 vehicles and provides much needed market certainty for vehicle manufacturers. So together with the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, Advanced Clean Fleets are major drivers of medium and heavy duty electrification. These two regulations are complementary, and they are critical tools for the states to achieve a full turnover of public and private fleets, help states meet aggressive climate change commitments, and again, reduce pollutant emissions in the communities that are suffering the most from diesel and truck and bus pollution.
Is there anything that you all have been working on that indicates that if you're doing ACT, you don't need to do the fleets rule, or is it, you mentioned, you almost talked about them as being siblings, if you will. They kind of go together. Is that the way you all are looking at them? And this could go to Peg and Rachel as well.
Yeah, so at NESCAUM, we've been in contact with the California Air Resources Board, and like any motor vehicle emission standards, if the states can choose to adopt ACT alone, they can choose to adopt ACT and ACF. It really is becoming a menu of policy options available to states to meet their unique needs.
Anything you want to add there, Peg or Rachel, on the fleets rule?
I would agree. The fleet rule is definitely a nice complement to the Advanced Clean Truck rule and would get us to our end game a lot quicker if there was actually a purchase requirement in addition to the sales requirement. So we are closely following what CARB is doing, and we will be listening in on the board hearing later this month on that rule.
Right on.
Yeah, and I would say the same for Oregon. We're sort of watching the California rule and evaluating what that could mean for Oregon, and if it's something else that Oregon would also want to pursue.
We're a little over our normal time, but I got a question from the audience that I want to throw at you all as we close. And it's kind of, I like it because it helps us establish where we're at versus where we've been. A lot of us have been working in this space for a very long time. And we're talking about zero emission vehicles now. We're using the term ZEV a lot, which could mean multiple technologies. For the most part, most of the attention in our space, even in the truck space, not just passenger vehicles, is batteries. But hydrogen is still a possibility, but some of these other fuels sources have kind of diminished in their importance. So as we close out, tell us from your perspectives, like where we are from this, from a policy point of view, and understanding what technologies need to be promoted most with policy right now.
I think there's definitely a space for hydrogen in the medium and heavy duty market, maybe a little more so than in the light duty market. And the Advanced Clean Truck rule, my understanding is that it's fuel neutral. So you can use hydrogen, or you could use a battery, and you're compliant. So it's open. In New Jersey, we had a law requiring us to develop a fuel cell task force to make recommendations on how to promote fuel cell use in transportation. And that group should be coming out with recommendations later this year. You might have also heard or seen our governor's announcement that we were joining with New York to explore the opportunity for a hydrogen hub in response to the US DOE Was it RFI? I'm not sure what it was called. So we are definitely all ears when it comes to hydrogen, but it's very important that the hydrogen be produced so that the total life cycle is positive or negative, however you look at it.
Yeah. Right on. Rachel, Jeremy?
Right. And I think, for us here, we have Daimler who's headquartered here in Oregon. And I know that they have, indicated hydrogen may be, an option for them as they're developing, for example, some of their big, semi-tractor trailer trucks. And so, we definitely want to encourage the development of, any zero emission technology. I think, as part of that discussion too, is just building up the infrastructure for that, because Oregon currently does not have hydrogen fueling stations. And so that's something else that, we need to sort of work with folks to kind of figure out how would we put that in place? How can we sort of foster that development overall?
So you mentioned Daimler, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also ask you to mention Electric Island, which is super unique at this point in the country, hopefully not for very long, but what they're trying to do there with charging and such in Oregon. Could you give the audience a little understanding about that quick before we turn to Jeremy?
Sure. So Daimler is the Electric Island is sort of a partnership with Daimler. Portland General Electric are one of the utilities here in Portland, to develop sort of a charging space for multi-use type charging. So whether it's for, the tractor trailers, other sort of large vehicles, to sort of see how it can be used, and whether it can be used as a model for other areas of the state. So it's really exciting just to kind of see the development of it, and we hope that we'll be able to see future ones throughout Oregon.
Yeah, right on, and elsewhere too, Rachel. That's just there. Yeah, but Jeremy, close us out.
Yeah, I would just say there's no one size fits all solution with zero emission trucks and buses. There look to be applications that are actually better suited for hydrogen. Time will tell, of course, if costs of vehicles and infrastructure come down and that infrastructure is indeed deployed. But right off the bat, long haul trucking looks like a suitable application for hydrogen trucks. And I would add that many of the states that have established vehicle purchase incentives and charging infrastructure incentive programs have made hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles eligible for those funds. So I think the states and participating jurisdictions in the medium and heavy duty ZEV memorandum of understanding are looking at all solutions as we seek to reduce emissions from medium and heavy duty trucks and buses.
Yeah, there's a guy over at DOE called Jiggershaw. He was in solar for a long time, and his soapbox was deploy, deploy, deploy. Everything was about deployment with him because he believed that we would get to cost goals by getting the technology out there, and largely he was correct in the keys to the clean power. I'm everything that you all are talking about and everything we're seeing in the news and in developments within the marketplace. It's the same thing with transportation. Get the technology out there. So it's very exciting to see you all setting up that groundwork so that technology is going to get really deployed as fast as possible. Exciting times with trucks. And, this brings us to a close with our current episode of EV Hub Live. I really appreciate Rachel, Peg, and Jeremy joining me to talk about medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan, all the other cool developments that have been going on in this space. See you next time. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye now.